even know what I know what a wildflower is, but like, can I even name what is my favorite one?
Latin names are not required. You can go with the common name if you'd like.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. So I'll start. I'm Kristen. I am the Senior Director of Programs at Climate Generation. And I am super excited that it might become spring here in Minnesota soon. But as I mentioned, I was just in the Smoky Mountains where it's 500% spring. But my favorite spring wildflower actually is one found in northern Minnesota called twin flower commonly, but it's like this big and it's got little droopy pink flowers. And it is the only flower that Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern nomenclature with plants, named after himself. He called it Linnea borealis. I will pass it to whoever's next. Who is Eric? Because Eric's smiling.
Just thinking about, I didn't want to be an easy one, but it's the California golden poppy. It's the state flower, which I just learned something interesting about. It actually has medicinal values. So it's good for, I believe it was like treating anxiety and stress and stuff like that, but it's illegal to pick them when they're growing wild. So if you were going to do that, you'd have to propagate them in your own backyard and grow them intentionally. But it's a beautiful flower, and crazy climate connection to that is they've been blooming sort of throughout the year this year because we had a really late like fall, like warm weather, kind of wacky rainfall. So we saw poppies like on the median strip here and on Park Boulevard in the middle of Oakland. Typically you see them just in the spring, but we saw them kind of like all year type of a thing, or at least, 9 months of the year. So kind of some craziness. I'll pass it over to my Oakland buddy, Cheney.
I also have to say poppy. My wife has a tattoo of a California poppy on her forearm, and her stepfather, like had basically a seed company, and we have a big picture of him in a field of poppies, and I have to say that. I'm founder of the Climascope project and a staff developer at the Reading and Writing project. Frank, why don't you go next?
All right, Frank Niepold, NOAA Climate Program Office. It's an interesting one, right? Because at my son's school, they used to have this thing called the Wildflower Project, and they had to do this whole project about wildflowers in Maryland. So I've spent a lot of time studying wildflowers over the years. So long story there, but the crocus is a beautiful purple flower. That's not the one I was looking for. There's another one that's just like growing wildfire in my yards right now, and I'm trying to find the name of it. I can't remember right now, but if I get it, I'll put it in. But that's one I love. Let's go, Jim. Why don't you go next? You're next on my screen.
Great, thanks, Frank. So Jim Callahan, Mobile Climate Science Labs, and Kristen, I am hoping to get at least maybe 10 minutes in on a subject, if today, on something that's going on heavily in California that we just want to get some feedback on. I'm afraid I'm going to have to make it a 3 for 3 on the California poppy. They're gorgeously orange, but it's like we don't plant them; they just grow by the hundreds on our property, in our house. So they've just taken off. They're just gorgeous. So sorry to be so California-ish, but it's hard to say no to that. Tiffany?
Hey everybody, I'm Tiffany Formant. I'm the School and Public Programs Manager for UCAR Center for Science Education at NCAR in Boulder, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And I also love poppies, but here in Colorado, those are not coming quite yet. And to go on the crocus theme, around here out in the woods, the pasque flowers are really one of the very first. They're in the crocus family, I think, right? And they're one of the first things that pop up. So that's always exciting to see that spring is coming. And how about Carrie?
Thanks, Tiffany. Carrie Herndon with National Center for Science Education. I'm a curriculum specialist there. I don't know if it's a wildflower, but I love dahlias. Typically, when I was living in DC, I would see them all the time closer to fall, but I know that they are in season in other parts of the United States. And I'll pass it to Deb.
Hi, my name's Deb Freeman. I edited encyclopedias on the environment. I'm trying to put together a science toy for kids. I guess you're talking about your favorite wildflowers. Dandelions and violets are out here on the East Coast. They're medicinal. You got wine, you got leaves. They're beautiful colors. And there's a woman, it says clean with an orange curtain.
Yes, that's Gina. Sorry that it says clean. My name's Gina. I am the program coordinator for Clean. And I've been in this role for about 6 months, which is exciting. The big thing here in the Adirondacks of New York is trilliums, but I also am partial to a pink lady slipper. And I would just like to say that Jim had a great suggestion as well. The yellow Gina is link that he put in the chat, and that might have to be my new go-to. So thanks, Jim. Has everyone gone?
I think everyone went. Yeah. Thanks everyone for humoring me on that. We have informal discussion today. It sounds like Jim has something he'd like to informally discuss. Does anyone else have any topics they would suggest? You want to throw them in the chat, or we're small, just shout them out today that we can put on the agenda. Otherwise, we're just here informally.
I don't have a topic, but I have an announcement. Today is the last Clean webinar, so I highly recommend joining or sharing.
The topic.
Teaching about climate and energy in communities that might not want to hear it. So it is low-key about misinformation, but we did not call it that. I'll put the link in the chat.
Thanks.
Gina, who's the presenter for
Karen
that?
Kurd. And sorry, I did not raise my hand. That was bad form. But yes, I know. I should know better. Karen Kurd.
Frank, you had your hand raised.
I was just raising my hand to cover the fact that I did the same thing.
Eric
So,
actually raised his real hand earlier.
No, I did my virtual one too, just to cover my
Okay.
bases. If there's time, I'd love to just sort of pick folks' brain about regional kind of climate efforts. So like New Jersey just did a statewide thing. I know that Jen Crester's often introduced her climate program for youth that can be sort of regional in nature. And I had this kind of thought about something like a Bay Area regional climate something, regional climate summit, something that brings folks together in an effective way that leverages everybody's strengths, because I know a lot of folks are doing this. So anyway, just something to think about if we got time.
I'd love to talk about that. Let's put that on after Jim. Anyone else have an announcement or a topic they'd like to add? Cheney.
I would love to also pick your brains about, I'm starting to think towards next year for launching the year around sustainability and climate change, and any kind of nature-based phenomenon around solutions to climate change or impacts of climate change that you think would kind of that spark curiosity that could be good for like a whole school kind of study of one kind of phenomenon. I'm really interested in that, and I'm kind of thinking about it as what would be good for like kind of younger kids, elementary school kids, and then middle/high school. Yeah.
So nature-based phenomena that like is like a spark to spark.
Yeah, like I was at a school last week in Portland, and they their whole year was about studying the lamprey, which was is tangentially related to climate change, but the kids were just so fascinated and excited about the lamprey, about the threats to the lamprey, about solutions to the lamprey, and how it's connected to climate change and pollution. And I'm struggling to find like great phenomenon, and maybe there's a place on the Clean website for that. I'm sure there is, but like super exciting phenomenon that spark curiosity that might kind of be a through line for an entire school year.
Cool. I put you on third topic. I think 3 topics is adequate for
that's
us to
probably
discuss today.
Thanks.
And they all are super, well, I don't know what Jim's is, but I'm sure it's awesome. So let's jump in with Jim. You have 10 minutes as you.
Okay, thank you. No, I'll go for that. I'll go for that. So the subject I just want to bring up is on a timely that, at least in the San Francisco Bay Area, large mass scale events are back. Science festivals are back. And that's specifically on that. And I wanted to sort of get feedback on it. I have checked in with Gina and Anna and Katie about making sure that Clean Network is well represented at the events, but it's truly to be the network, it's how do people feel about it, their comfort level, their enthusiasm, requests about how the network can be represented. So I want to give you a little background on what specifically I'm speaking of, but then look for comments of it. Of course, with COVID, mass scale events have been not in public for a couple of years, but specifically the Bay Area Science Festival events are back. There's all kinds of them, but there mostly are 3 now. One at the San Francisco Giants ballpark, one at Cal State University East Bay, and those 2 have already happened. And one more to happen, which is in the North Bay at the Sonoma County Fairgrounds. They were successful beyond my expectations by far. The public turnout was wonderful. The exhibitors were wonderful. Eric was wonderful. Here's just some characteristics. They are incredibly diverse ethnically. They are very strong on making sure that it's clear that young women, STEM is for you, or at least you should be strong in STEM. You can be strong in STEM. They go out of their way to make sure they're ethnically diverse. Their climate education and climate action is absolutely welcome, encouraged. These are sponsored by the University of California, and as I mentioned, one of them also the Cal State system. They definitely say that we have high quality education. There can be interaction. There can be specialists, so we can take things up to a different level. And they're totally welcoming of us, at least, that we can promote other programs that we work with. So while we have a booth for Mobile Climate Science Labs, that's the agreement. And supposedly, or the general agreement is you're not supposed to sublet, but they have never had any question with anyone we've done. As I think Carrie might know from NSC, National Center for Science Education. At first, you shared a booth with us, and then successfully had booths out there. And then, of course, Eric's programs and so on. Cheney, I think, could be invited. But I would want to see Clean be well represented. But here's the thing of how people's comfort level is, and if people like the idea, just making sure that it's representing. Are we missing anybody else who wants to be highlighted? Are there messages? What the base is there's a poster that goes up, and then we have business cards, or can have basically materials, but it really is to be seen that the Clean Network is seen at these events. Who's involved? Who's doing things? That's really it. The event coming up yet, we have 400 square feet, and we're put at the entrance of the main pavilion. 400 square feet, and we're given the booth for free because of the characteristics of what we do. We're volunteers. We participate in all of them. We're not a corporation. We're not a government agency. They give us booths for free, and they charge the other places free. So we're not asking for Clean to send anybody, although anyone else is welcome. There's no cost involved to Clean, but still it's to see how everybody feels about that. Is this something Clean and Clean Network should be part of an event, especially I would think that they're so diverse and so much sending the message that people of color and women can and should be strong on STEM, whether or not they intend to be a scientist, an engineer, or a technology person when they're ready to work. So open up for that. I kind of blew most of the 10 minutes. I'm sorry about that. Let's see.
All right. I think you, no. Gina, were you gonna, aren't you doing like ambassadors for clean? Is that something you guys are working on right now?
It is, yeah. So I was just gonna say Anna is out right now. So Jim, as he mentioned, has reached out to us, but we're gonna have another internal meeting about it with the clean staff because can't make any decisions right now because Anna isn't here. But we will again. I can't say for sure right now because we haven't had that conversation. But I agree, Jim, and we are happy to send materials like I know you mentioned the bookmark and clean flyers, like any materials we're more than happy to send. We do have clean ambassadors that we send to certain events, but even that funding is a little more limited. So I'm not sure we'll have a person clean. I'm not sure there'll be a clean funded person there, but we're happy to share materials. And if anybody from the Clean Network is, close and wants to be there, that would be absolutely great too. So that's my 2 cents.
I mean, I know Frank, you have your hand up, but just related to what Gina said, Jim, over the years, like before our summer institutes, when we were more in person, we have sent an email out to the Clean Network and said, hey, we're doing our summer institute. If you would like your materials shared, we'd be happy to share them with the teachers that come. So that would be, you could send it and see if people send you something. Like, for example, we would love to have the summer institute flyer on the table there for teachers. I'm sure 10 Strands would greatly appreciate that since they are the regional hub for the California cohort for the Institute. So that would be a suggestion too. Frank.
Jim, it's an awesome question. I think one of the ways I think about it is I look at Clean as a network, right? Because it is a network, right? But it's more who else would show up organizationally through Clean as opposed to Clean itself, right? Because as I think Kristen's answer and that there are other entities that are going to be at play that are connected through Clean, but Clean itself isn't really, I think that's a little bit not the lead. The lead is like your organization and Eric, what you're doing in Cheney and 10 Strands and the instead of it being a singular branded logo like Clean, it's actually the collaboration of many organizations enabled by Clean. For me, that feels more the way reality works. And if you go to anywhere in the country, that combination would be different. One thing you may not know, Anna and a group of us are working on some network analysis for Clean because you saw that request. But we're now starting to look at the analysis, and the networking that Clean does is really quite substantial. And we're starting to think about who's connected to who's connected, who's connected. You get a really robust answer, but I think, Jim, my bottom line is it's more like who comes together under, but the banner isn't Clean. It's the group of organizations. It just feels like the right way to do that for me.
So Frank, I probably should, let me go, let's start with the earlier one. So, I mean, there in a way, the response, Kristen, you had is really part of what I was looking for. This is basically an invitation of any part of the Clean Network. We have the space to promote that program, and gladly will do that. I can go into what the levels are. I mean, if you have someone at these events, you can have someone who talks about the literature and does things. That can happen. And one thing is the capacity of our volunteers is I don't think we can spare a volunteer just to stand there and talk about these other programs. But posters and handouts, and people come over and they ask about it. If they ask about what's in the schools, or I'm a teacher, I want to learn more, then we'll talk about it, right? We'll talk about it. But people will see this, and because what people come for is the hands-on science. It just draws huge crowds and does different things. But to be seen in that environment is fantastic. And want to promote anybody who wants to. We will definitely have the space, especially at this other one. This is the one we get tons of space on things. And to plug Cheney is, Climate Scope, absolutely. We can print posters and we can do things. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be expensive display, but people notice who's there. And finally, maybe other thing I could mention is about these events is these are places where we can take pictures. We take videos of students in action. It's part of your agreement when you walk onto the property that you're going to have your images taken. So this is images of these organizations with all these students of all these colors and all these things, smiling and engaged in climate action and wanting to do it. And there's your program right behind them. It's like all these photo ops that go on. So Yukar, by the way, Yukar, we've had posters of you in the past, so this is not a new thing.
Eric.
My mind, so kind of in answer to Jim, also the Lawrence Hall of Science had a part of the Bay Area Science Festival too, which we did some outreach there. And just in terms of your first question, like I feel very comfortable these days being out and about, I guess, because the strains are getting less challenging and folks are vaccinated and et cetera. So that comfort zone piece for me is good. And it's nice to be back out doing in-person stuff. My mind went to kind of what Frank and Gina shared in terms of Clean's role at large scale events. I think it's sort of, if the vision is like for these ambassadors, which I signed up to be one, is to sort of start to have some frontline program delivery and really interaction, then I think that's a great way to potentially go. But I recognize the funding constraints around that, because it's the same for my organization. We leverage grad students and industry professionals to deliver frontline programs to students in the classroom, but we have very little staff to actually do those things. But should we grow capacity and move in that direction to be, doing that kind of thing, then I think it makes sense. So it's just sort of what would be the vision of that role or Clean in that sort of, zone. The other thing I'd say to Jim, what you said, the hands-on stuff, every time I do a presentation at a conference or just, an informational thing, to have something that you can get folks hands-on to get the concepts tangible goes a long way, because it's not just talking about something, it's actually them exploring the phenomena and the concept, and it just draws them in. So I is a firm believer in that regardless. Even in these ambassador programs, if we've got 1,000 lessons in the database, the Clean database, and what's the best way to highlight those? To put one out on the table and interact with it and have somebody actually do the thing and talk about the phenomena and connect it to the climate change or the science of it. So I think there's a lot there, but again, recognizing the constraints of what Clean is too, and what makes sense.
Awesome. I agree. We have over the years sort of started developing those sort of, when we're at booths, like what are some things that are quick doing things at the booth, activities that are easily folded or traveled with or whatever. But that'd be a fun thing for us, because there's so many people that have so much time, like to look at the Clean collection and say, hey, which things in here are good for like an interpretive opportunity as well. All right. It seems like you got some good suggestions, Jim. Our next topic, was it? I'm going back in my agenda. Who's next? Eric. Eric was interested in talking about regional. So like, well, sort of like what you're putting on, and I'm
signed up for that as well, Kristen, to be in the climate generation training.
Yay, I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. And I think there's so many of great efforts like what you're putting together, and the fact that you're kind of focusing it regionally too. You have these regional cohorts, that model I really like. So just kind of thinking about, and this kind of goes back to conversations we've had over the years about the ecosystem of stuff that's out there now, right? I mean, there's just this vast quantity of curriculum. There's many organizations doing great things. The umbrella has grown tremendously in terms of who's involved and who we want to be involved. So to make meaning of all of that seems to be the challenge. So how do you have a through line for something? And one of my sort of answers to that is place-based, like really not hyper focused, but focus on a region, focus on the Bay Area, focus on California, focus on how is our climate specifically changing? What does that mean? How are people taking action? The things we've talked about in terms of uplifting local stories, positive actions that folks are taking from all walks of life, right? To really uplift all the voices. So, and do that regionally, because that's where on the ground differences get made, I guess. I mean, everything local to global is important, right? But so anyway, and even around these regional summit ideas, or summit regional things, there's so much going on. So how to, and Jen Crester has mentioned, take what we have, hack it and make it relevant for your space, for your area, right? So just curious about other folks' thoughts on that idea of doing something regionally. So and also is not to be redundant, because one of the calls we talked about how important it is not to feel like we're the expert at everything, but to find our spot within the ecosystem and then partner with other strong agencies and organizations and groups to sort of meet the gap so that the sum is more than the parts, that kind of approach. So anyway, that's just some framing, but curious
Can
about
I-
it. Yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So are you talking about doing this at through like a K-12 lens, or through at a community level, at a youth level, a student level?
I think that's a great question. And I think in some ways, my interdisciplinary brain says all of the above, but I know that that's not necessarily realistic. My personal experience is in the K-12 environment, both from working with students directly, but also at teaching teachers. So, but I think there's a lot of traction with combining those efforts with like ECAPs, local environmental action programs and projects at the city level, right? Or like the way San Mateo County Office of Ed has joined with 10 strands to sort of implement, to garner the funding to then create and implement a K-12 curriculum across the state. So that's government partnerships, right? And there's a lot of traction there too. So I don't know, Kristen, a good question. And
well, yeah. So the reason I'm gonna jump ahead because I'm a facilitator here, but like those three things kind of come to mind. But the first thing that came to my mind in thinking about it, and actually I'll put the link in. We have over the years developed a model of these local level climate convenings that are, I think, we've done in two different ways. One of them, so it started out with a project in working with 12 communities across the state of Minnesota with the same model, but like you regionalize, you localize that, and it's bringing in, a speaker about climate change impacts that are local, really working with three just community people that have experienced impacts or working on solutions to tell their story. So it's like compelling. And then offering 3 to 5 workshops that are, what do I do now? So community folks would attend the convening. They would learn very locally. There's like many different levels of what's happening here. Of course, there's like collective efficacy, like you're meeting and you're seeing people in your community that care about an issue and understanding like, oh, I'm not alone. And then you're like connecting with very local level, tangible opportunities to take action. we always made sure that like the storytellers that were represented were folks that were like actually just normal and they represented the communities. So making sure we had people of color, making sure we had youth, making sure they weren't like wonky professionals necessarily all the time. And we always made sure that those solutions were like, by the end, they would know how to actually do something that they could do. And that one of them was more advocacy, you know, political, and some of them were hands-on and those sorts of things. We also took that and had youth actually plan and put them on. We had a whole series for a couple of years of youth developing them, which we found actually the convenings that youth plan were much actually higher attended to, and which was a cool thing. And then we put on our Youth Climate Justice Summit here in Minnesota each year for high schoolers, which is similar to John's model, but it's actually very heavy advocacy based. Like the students talk to their legislators after a day of going through like, how do you talk to a legislator, and going to youth plan sort of convenings. So that came to mind. And then as far from the K-12 perspective, like, as you've seen, I mean, you signed up for it. We are very intentionally planning these regional cohorts. And the part that you're not seeing as someone who registered for the Institute is the planning that's happening with those organizations. So it's not just that 10 Strands signed up and is like, yeah, I'll help and I'll host this day of the Institute. 10 Strands is actually attending 6 workshops where they're co-planning that Institute with us. Like it's not just us. And thinking about what are we bringing in for those 2 days where everyone's together, and what does it look like at the local level for our teachers, so they're having consistent experiences, but at a very regionalized kind of local perspective. And so every year we've been trying to identify areas that like we have like returning cohorts, but we also have like this year we got Arkansas. So looking for places like, where is disinformation like pervasive? Where is there help that's needed and stuff too? And so while it's a national level, the intention is that is really localized through the cohort piece. And we're always looking to bring in new folks for that and trying to, raise the funds to also compensate. So that's part of it, is like they're being compensated, not $1 million, but like we're building in a budget now every year where we compensate those cohort organizations to actually like be set up as leaders. And I would say in the future, like if, I think our goal is to really have more regional folks that are working at those levels that are like part of our really long-term partners. And we've got folks now coming back for like a 3rd year. I think that NOAA, like there are organizations that are like better suited to be a long-term sustained partner. So like NOAA's Mid-Atlantic cohort with BART, like NOAA is an agency that like is doing this work, and we have the Pacific Islands. Maybe it's hard to coordinate with them because there's such a different time zone, but so looking for like what's the infrastructure that already exists that, to build that piece out as well. So sorry, I yammered for a while. Frank, what do you got to say?
I think Jim might be ahead of me.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead, Frank. You're being kind. I want to be kind back.
All right, I appreciate that. I mean, I'll be concise. Eric, you're asking an amazing question. I think that's where our community is kind of like beginning to realize it's definitely not just K-12, right? Because this is all about learning and empowerment and capacity. And so there's lots of different sectors of work that relate to that, whether it's media, all forms of education, training, capacity building, civic engagement. It's a much richer ecosystem of activity. You could just have just K-12 education, right? That's totally doable. But what was really starting to show up, and I mean, actually Kristen's work at Climate Generation plus others have been kind of leading the vanguard of this, where it's definitely other partnerships and other collaborations. So convening and coordinating and backboning and networking and infrastructuring, those kinds of words is what the most critical missing element is. As opposed to, we need museums to do this. Yes. We need K-12 to do this. Yes. But actually what we need is that strong coordination. When in the Bay Area, when you had BayClick, that was forming, which came out of the informal education and has since dissolved from what I understand. You need that entity that holds the group around the shared mission. There's a lot of literature that I'm looking at right now and on a new paper with Deb Morrison and Haley Krim on this exact need. I did give you some insights, as there are some examples out there. One that might be the closest to you that I think is a really killer example that builds on, that complements what Climate Generation is doing in our partnership with on the Institute, is the Mid-Atlantic Climate Change Education Convening, which for 2 years it was a conference, now it's a convening. And they're starting to look at that as the first regional climate change education group. And if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll see that consortium of organizations that are involved in that kind of work. That came out of the Climate Change Education Partnership Made Clear grant.
Mhm.
The informal team kind of just spun off into their own thing after that grant, was finished. Sorry, I'm just going to stop. There's so much more to say about this, Eric. It's a really great topic.
I'll emphasize, you need the backbone and you need money. You need to compensate, because like I'm a part of a number of initiatives. Frank knows some of them that like have no funding, and they just can't get going or sustain because people are not being compensated for their time, and so they can't dedicate it to it, even though they want to. So like, we all know this, but it's like really like, it's honestly not worth even attempting unless you have some funding to put into it, at least a little, to get it going, which is what we finally realized. Like, we have to figure out how to compensate these cohorts to be a part of it. Jim.
Thank you. So let's see. Encouraging each talking about the region they know, and us learning from the strengths of each region, right? What are the different characteristics? Because then we can bring in those characteristics to our region. Clearly, there's 3 of us who know the Bay Area, and I would say a characteristic of the San Francisco Bay Area is it is very regionally minded. After all, the name of the Bay Area is, generally, I think we call ourselves the Bay Area more than we call ourselves San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, San Jose. That's just, the name of who we are tends to be regional. And there's a lot of strength there to work with that maybe just to note some of the characteristics of it. Clearly, these science festivals, they by nature are regional. That's their point. They have them in different places, plus San Francisco is the hub. Some of the government way things work with California is actually one of the most important agencies that have to do with climate change is actually on a regional basis. The air quality districts, they're regional. They're kind of in between local and state about as how they work, but they've been around doing climate work for a long time and organize a youth climate summit. So that's strong. The science centers are meant to be regional in a lot of ways. And I guess so that, okay. And then the way the University of California and the state district states, they do things regionally. Now at these big events or whatever, or excuse me, the big events, schools are represented. Leading schools are there. K-12 schools will have their hands-on science or their program be represented. So it's a very clear, well-built bridge between informal and informal. There isn't a distinction. It's not, oh, we don't do schools here. And as people have said, the number one question we will get at these events consistently, pretty much for 20 years, is how do we get your mobile climate science labs to come to our schools? People get that this is great in the schools, right? Things work. Now, I guess the other one I would just mention is there's the question of, I guess, recommending that we're flexible on how we define the subject matter of what we're working with. Obviously, there is a regional program or a regional event or a regional summit about climate change, climate education, clearly, and that's we need to take care of. there are so many regional efforts that want us to be a component of them, but they're not framed that way. They're framed as a STEM event. They're framed as an environmental education event or region. They're education or they're social justice. And many of them in the Bay Area are all of them together, right? They're meant to be STEM, social justice, diversity, education. And so anyway, the frames are not, this is a climate education regional program per se, but one where, like a STEM one where, yeah, climate, it's just generally recognized. Climate change is one of the top 3 subjects that people want to deal with. Well, so we're there, and they will do an awful lot for us for free. So, Kristen, I never want to argue against more funding, and people need to be funded. It's just that we also have the ability to do things where we're basically given, we're given access where at least we don't have to pay for things that others do. So that happens. So that, like, when you have paid staff, well, you're paying the staff to be there, but you don't have to pay for the booth, and you don't have to, and people are giving you, they're giving you the materials for doing the booth or putting or Bay Area Air Quality Management District will basically fund the summit, right? And they just say, come and be represented here. So.
Great, thank you. All right, Cheney, we have 15 minutes to discuss nature-based phenomena, which sounds super fun.
Well,
yeah,
this is probably going to reveal a lot of my ignorance. So you all know that I'm a
we
literacy.
are nice.
My background is literacy.
Yep.
I'm wondering if any of you have tips or suggestions or resources for helping me help schools, principals, and superintendents find exciting phenomena to launch and kind of have as a through line their focus on climate change, sustainability, environmental justice. When I start to look online and even on the Clean website, I get quickly overwhelmed. I think it relates to Eric's, like ideally it's regional. Yeah, I was talking to Tiffany Boyd, and she, part of what got me thinking, I've been thinking about this a lot, but she sent me this kind of cool Boulder initiative that they have like 3 kind of nature-based like climate solutions that could be, so anything that you could point me towards. Yeah, drawdown is great. So yeah, sorry, last thing. Any like recommendations for actual phenomena or recommendations for how to help teachers and schools like choose phenomena based on their location?
Yeah, this is something that I have done dabbled a lot with, because I used to work deep in like NGSS, like when they were first launching and thinking about, because like the next generation science standards are like they're based in like phenomena based learning, like that's what they're about. And also similar to you, Cheney, like I although science trained, maybe I think I'm probably more of a humanities person. And I have been really attracted to lately thinking about ways that phenomena is not just necessarily the scientific phenomena. And if you're not beholden to have to do that, then like go for it. And so like last summer, actually at the Institute, we went through this process of looking at impacts and basically doing like a concept mapping exercise of like what are the repercussions and also the precursors for this, that this thing that like you see, and those coming from like the students, what they're just like, what did you see in the world today? Like that's what phenomena is. Like what was interesting about like what you saw in the world today? Like, oh, and it's like, oh, when I like one of my favorite phenomena, and I'm not forgetting what it's called, but when like light goes through like a glass and on the other side is this beautiful thing. There's a name for that. And I forget what it's called. It's like it's not refraction. It's like an actual, I forget what it's called, but like that's a phenomena that you just like see at the dinner table. Like it goes through your wine glass, let's say, if you're drinking wine, and like on the other side is this thing. But like, what are something you're seeing? And then we want to relate it to climate, like have them look for it, but then put it in the center and like, what made this happen and what's happening because of it? And then what are the things we can do that go with it? And those are being like social science, the EJ, the injustice repercussions and the history part of it, like bringing in that piece. I think one of my favorite activities I ever did with teachers was actually like, I was driving somewhere and Minnesota Public Radio had this whole like 8-minute segment on how the Duluth boardwalk was like destroyed every 5 years, and like because of like huge waves, and how now because of like projections, climate projections, and also because of what we know about engineering practices, they were building a new one. And this 8-minute segment had like green STEM careers and like adaptation and mitigation and climate impacts. And it was all like in this thing. And we literally for like 3 hours with a group of teachers listened to that and broke out all the phenomena that was occurring, the engineering piece, the science piece, the social piece. So like helping, I mean, honestly, like what's the process? It's like, it has to be so, like you're saying, local. I feel like you have to bring a facilitator in to help guide that conversation with teachers, to help them understand how they guide that conversation with their students. Like what are the, I feel like STEM teaching tools may have some help with this. You know about them? Okay. Stuff with this too. Philip Bell and Deb, like they're doing some crazy stuff. But student identified phenomena I always go to like center the students, whatever. Something that's like really important to them. Eric, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, same thing. I mean, I just dropped 3 citizen science links into the chat, but it reminded me of, I think like your approach, what you were saying, Cheney, about going local. It's hard because like there's certain phenomena that are like, wow, like there's times up in the redwoods right here in Oakland where the ladybugs are just crazy. There's this huge population, right? But you don't exactly know when that's going to be, right? So to grab that is a huge teachable moment, but again, you're not going to know exactly when that's going to happen. Like there's tons of things within citizen science resources. So like phenology studies, when are things starting to burst? Bud bursts, is a huge one. Up in the redwoods, there's other things. We were looking at sword ferns as an indicator of climate change, which is not like a big wow, eye candy thing that maybe you're looking for, but it was very hands-on, very tangible, and really easy for even the youngest learners to engage in. So I think you might look for that umbrella thing that's big, that happens in a region, but you might also think about what's happening in a very specific ecosystem within that region, and how to make meaning there specifically, right? How to make meaning in the redwood forest, how to make meaning by the bay, how to make meaning, in a savanna, chaparral environment, that type of an approach, something like that.
Thank you, everyone. Frank, do you have something?
Just a quick one. I mean, one of the general principles here, and this is something that's been bubbling in our community, is most of the climate solutions are completely invisible to people. You can't see them. You have to interpret. You have to show people them, and then you have to unpack them carefully. And so, I'm playing around with the Living Shorelines projects in the Bay Area. There are tons of projects going on that you would not know that is living shorelines are an amazing solution. But unless like that patch of new land that was just built and it looks a little different than the way it normally would, is a climate adaptation solution. you have to interpret it. You have to bring them to it, and you have to explain it. Trees, forests, living, are they an actual sink of carbon? It can be. But, so I think I would just strongly encourage, to also connect with Elizabeth Bagley, who's now with SEI, because she was working on a dichotomous key of climate solutions for drawdown, because it's like really hard to use drawdown because it's like, wow, all of this, but like where you are, it drops down to like 7. It's not 100, it's not 120, it's 7. Because, where you are in the Bay Area, you can't, do some of these things because they don't relate to your geography. So like, how do you make 120 drop down to things that are like, oh, now let's go find those. And where are we in the process of this grand transformation of society to actually decarbonize, draw down as much as we can, and build resilience simultaneously? But if you can't see it, you don't feel like we're making progress. And if you can't find progress in the Bay Area, you're not looking hard enough.
I was thinking too, my favorite phenomenon when I think of California, like Monterey Bay, is the butterfly migration. Like having seen that before, oh my gosh, it's so cool. And what I love about phenomena like that is how it links local to global. So like how butterflies are impacted by where, like, it's not just like there in California, it's like how they're connected. That's my favorite one that I remember from there. But I don't know, Cheney, was that helpful though?
It was helpful. Yeah. I mean, I think even just getting a few of these examples, as well as some of these websites that I'm hoping will give me some tips on, how to help teachers and principals kind of decide on what would be most exciting. Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting question because you got such a large geography. A local school here did something they happened to be next to a stream.
Yeah.
So they could go out there and they could do something that directly impacted their school.
Yes.
And so I know like solar providers, they'll put the panels on the schools and give them the meters, and they can do something with their school in their local, change their local environment. And I saw somebody do green roofs. It's such a tricky question. I'm going to be following it because if you can help them implement something, then they'll feel powerful.
Right.
But you're
and
gonna
the
have to
idea of
do-
like that Kristen said of like emergent curriculum of like allowing kids to like go around, look, observe, notice, talk, and have it come from them, and a balance between like that and helping them come up with something that's actually practical, actionable, realistic.
Well, but the step one really is like what is phenomena? That's like that takes a while for them to really understand. But once a kid or anyone understands what phenomena, like what that means to identify a phenomena, then you start noticing it all the time. Like, oh, when I like zip my zipper, a spark happens every time. Oh, that's friction or whatever's happening, like that's like phenomena. And like starting from that level, and I'm really interested in this right now too, thinking about how we've been talking about disinformation and combating disinformation, and like it isn't about students knowing content, it's about them thinking like scientists and understanding how science works. That's how people are going to stop on believing the bullshit that's out there, is like that they understand what science, how it works, and do it, versus like being told this is a phenomena and this is, so always being patient with that. It's a patient that you have to be patient, and teachers and administrators aren't always patient, but that's truly how it's supposed to work, that it's like slow and like emergent. It is supposed to be emergent. Science is supposed to be emergent.
And I know we have to go, but I get really excited about it as a literacy person because focusing on phenomena really levels the playing field for kids.
Yeah.
Because it's the world they're dealing with, it's not texts. And
Mhm.
so it's just a really exciting entry point.
Cool. I love that question. Well, it's been
Anyone-
lovely, folks. Yeah.
Well, one quick, if you don't know, Undaunted K-12, they're a cool new organization that's come into the space, and they do a lot of work. But one of the things that they've been doing a lot of work is how to fund the development of phenomena that you would explore at schools. And so with the infrastructure money and some of the recovery money, they've been doing a lot of interesting work. So there should be, to pick up on Deb's point, there should be projects at schools to do this work, and having students involved in the creation of phenomena, as opposed to looking for phenomena in a passive way, I think takes your point. But the money actually, so Jonathan and his team over there at Undaunted K-12 have done some really interesting thinking, as has the Aspen K-12 Climate Action Group. Just another angle to think.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, go forward, do good work, and have a great day. All the good stuff.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen.
Take care.
Thank you.